AIIB's governance structure is composed of the Board of Governors, the Board of Directors, a President, and several Vice Presidents. The Board of Governors serves as the highest decision-making body. It consists of one governor and one alternate governor appointed by each member country. The Board of Directors, composed of 12 governors, each representing one or more member, is responsible for daily operations and tasks delegated to it by the Board of Governors. 9 of those members are from within the Asia-Pacific region, and 3 representing members outside the region. The president of AIIB is required to be a national of a regional member country who is elected by the Board of Governors and may serve up to 2 5-year terms. Vice presidents will be appointed by the Board of Directors on the recommendation of the president. With unprecedented reporting access to AIIB, we not only had an exclusive interview with AIIB President Jin Lichun, we also managed to unveil those not much publicized other key members of the senior management team and talk to them one by one. In the UK was the very first from quote-unquote the West or the developed economies who volunteered to join AIIB. Help us to shed some light on this process, how the decision was being made.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that the UK did take that decision, and in fact I was very much part of making that decision, because in the coalition government I was one of the foremost senior decision makers in that period. And what we saw was that China was bringing forward an idea which was a genuine attempt to create a new multilateral institution. The UK has long believed that many countries working together is the best way to try and solve international problems, economic problems like the needs to invest in infrastructure. We, in common with many countries around the world, see investment in infrastructure as one of the important ways to tackle the challenges of building economic growth around the world.
But still, some might say developed economies are waiting to see what's going to happen. The United States, Canada, Japan, just to name a few. How important it is, from your perspective, for them to understand the importance of this organization and also to work as part of this organization?
But look, we have friendly relations with a whole lot of countries who haven't joined the banks. The Americans, for example, are now very positive about what the AIIB is trying to achieve. They see that this is an organization that has been set up with the highest standards of governance, whose policies match up to other institutions. You know, our environmental and social standards are the same as the World Banks or the Asian Development Banks, for example. And so we will always welcome those countries if they wish to join the bank in future. But in the end, that must be a decision for them as sovereign countries. And the AIIB is there to serve its members, whichever countries choose to join.
You transfer yourself from Asia Development Bank, ADB, to AIIB. Why?
It's a very good question. I don't think a new MDB is created every day. So it's a very unique opportunity to be, if you like, on the ground floor of a new building and to be with the management team, with the early pioneers, and to work with them to create something. So I think
be one of them.
And be one of them. So it's very exciting, and I feel very privileged to be part of that group. I worked with President Jin Lichun in ADB, and so I'm familiar with his leadership style. And one thing which always struck me about his style was that he was always open to good ideas. And I think, you know, that is what anybody wishes.
When did you work with him?
I worked with him in ADB when he was there for 5 years as vice president. I was assistant general counsel at the time in the legal office. So I would go to all of his management committee meetings where projects were approved. So I got to work.
Remember one or two stories still with him?
I remember one case, you know, where oil had just gone over 50.
Right.
And we were all shocked at $50 or $60. And he said, you know.
Of course, that was that time.
That's right. And he said, it's still too cheap. Even at $100, it will be cheap. And it was almost prophetic. And after a few months, the price had shot well over 100. So he has.
Did you go back to him and ask, how did you know?
So we joked about that later on, a few months later. But he was always inspirational, and he would always, he's able to bring his own experience into the room, which I think makes development real because of his own personal experiences, and of course then he can make a point through literature as well. And I think that's always it's a different perspective brought into a discussion.
But I think President Jin also is a fan of yours, I guess, because this is what he said in a press release when the CI unit was just being announced. He said this, it is going to play a fundamental role in the bank's governance. So seriously, it is the issue of governance. Of course, that's the issue the outside world is going to doing extra scrutiny about AIIB only because you're new.
Well, let me first make the point that we care about governance not because others care about governance.
Great point.
We care about governance because we believe governance is good. That good governance, a well-run institution is a good institution. That's something we want. Also, we are a 21st century institution. So we need a 21st century governance structure. What I mean by this, if you look at all three elements, compliance, effectiveness, integrity, when the other MDBs were formed, these terms did not perhaps even exist in that sense. When you bring these new notions to an existing culture, it has difficulty. You have to manage people to accept those. We are at a very fortunate juncture, position in AIIB that from day one, we can take these policies, adapt these policies, and make them part of our DNA. And that is what truly will make this bank so different.
Of course, the reason why there are others who do not focus necessarily on infrastructure has a lot to do with the enormous amount of money infrastructure would need compared to other projects. So would that mean fewer projects of AIIB compared to the others?
I think we see our comparative advantage in specializing in a few areas, and they will develop over time. One is the example of green infrastructure. So countries clearly are looking for ways for financing sustainable infrastructure that is resilient to climate change, financing green urban transport solutions, and AIIB can be an important player in this area. Then cross-border infrastructure. Many large projects are connections between countries to connect economies, to connect Europe and Asia, to connect different parts of Asia. These are very large investments for transport, for energy connections, water connections. Those projects are so large that a single bank can typically not afford to finance all the needs.
The problem of designing quality, implementable, sustainable project is a challenge for a multilateral development bank like AIIB.
Sometimes it's a lot of differences between developed economies and developing economies. And also between countries like where you're from originally, India, and also those in Central Asia. So how would you make sure that your experiences back in India and elsewhere will be able to apply to your current job?
We have also struggled a lot in providing infrastructure. When the developing country, the human resource is a problem, the financial resource is a problem, the capacity to devise a good project is also a problem. So they need support at all stages. So that's why we are going to create a special fund to provide assistance, technical assistance to developing countries, whereas in developed countries, their requirement is little sophisticated. They want high quality of infrastructure projects. I can give you by example, in Mongolia, they want a simple railway project to transport their goods to the market, simple railway. In India, we want a high-speed bullet train connecting between two different cities, which costs billions of dollars. The requirement between the developing country and the development country has a vast change.
What is very important is what lessons and experience can we learn from some of the predecessors, for example, World Bank and AIIB?
I can give you an example. In my last posting in India, we wanted to develop huge 1,000 megawatt of solar park. So we approached AIIB to develop some land for a solar park, and the AIIB has agreed to to provide finance for the evacuation of power. Since we have put up the power evacuation infrastructure, many private investors came and put up their projects, 25 megawatt, 50 megawatt, 10 megawatt.
Right.
So sometime a small help from the multilateral development bank is able to leverage huge investment from the private sector, number one. The other lesson learned, which weaknesses from these multilateral development banks, but they take a lot of time. They have a lot of conditionalities, a lot of policies to be complied. One way it is good, but if we can expedite this approval process a little bit, then it is good for many people who are implementing the project. So AIIB will be faster enough in expediting giving various approval.
So how to make sure the system is really efficient?
We will have to apply technology. We will apply IT system that really, or basically will improve the quality of the transactions or maybe decision-making process. Right. Maybe we start with the transactions because some of the transactions is very standard. But if we do it manually compared to automatically using ID, much faster in ID.
During our discussions with the senior management, many of who hailed from different backgrounds, they were unfailingly enthusiastic about the prospects of this visionary startup. They also expressed excitement about Beijing, where AIIB is headquartered. Their eyes lit up. Take a look.
The experience of China over the last decades is so important and so unusual that the opportunity to live here and actually feel what Chinese development has brought about, how it has come about, is a wonderful professional and personal opportunity.
Beijing is a very great cultural city. I will enjoy. Of course, I will miss my homemade food, but in India, Chinese food is very famous. But the original Chinese food I am getting here, so I am not going to miss anything.
You have a lot of mosques in Beijing, so I can do a prayer on Fridays and so many recently halal food, Islamic food. So it's really convenient.
I actually come from the Highlands of Scotland, so I grew up in a very country area, you know, in a small village, in a small rural community in the UK. So London was already very big for me. Now Beijing is even bigger. So I'm also looking forward to getting to know some of the Chinese countryside. I like to hill walk and go fishing.
For me, my last 4 years were about worrying about China and AIIB. So I traveled a lot around China, looking at AIIB's projects in China. Of course, I will not be traveling so much in my official capacity around China. So I'll be sitting in Beijing and worrying about projects elsewhere and making sure that they conform to the highest principles which this bank has set for itself.